Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Will Barbie, and I am the president of the William F. Buckley Jr. program here at Yale. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this afternoon's conversation with Miss Megyn Kelly, entitled The New Media Revolution. Before I introduce our guest, I'd like to say a few words about the Buckley program. The William F. Buckley Jr. program is the flagship program of the Buckley Institute, an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and open political discussion at Yale. We have hosted lectures, dinner seminars, firing line debates, and an annual conference every year since 2011. Our over 750 Buckley Fellows hold a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious, conservative thought, the Buckley program has become an institution on Yale's campus and a symbol for a more open and representative political atmosphere. Especially a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge, Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program and how to become a fellow on our website at buckleyinstitute.com. I also would like to express a word of gratitude to Richard Mayer, whose generous support made tonight's event possible. And now I am very pleased to introduce our speaker for this evening. Megyn Kelly is a journalist and host of one of the top podcasts in the country, The Megyn Kelly Show. She is also the founder of Devil May Care Media and hosts a popular radio show on Sirius XM. As a world-renowned journalist, Kelly rose to prominence reporting on some of the most consequential U.S. and international news events of the past decade. She was a journalist at Fox and NBC News, and she has moderated 6 presidential debates. In 2016, her memoir, Settle for More, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. She practiced law as a litigator for 9 years before her media career. She has an impressive and varied list of notable interviews, including presidents, prime ministers, major celebrities, and cultural figures. Please join me in welcoming Megyn Kelly to the Buckley Institute and to Yale.
How's it going, everybody? Thank you. Will wonders never cease? How did you get into Yale? I mean, aren't you supposed to be a bunch of conservatives or like conservative adjacents? And here you are. I was told it didn't happen. It's amazing.
Here we are, right?
Yeah, congrats.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I guess I'd just like to begin and say, this is quite the political moment we are all living again. I know that people on both the right and the left can agree on that, and I'm just curious how it's felt for you to be reporting on these things, and in the past, say, 6 months, even go back longer since, obviously your early career on Fox. What is it like today to be reporting on all these things?
Well, it's amazing. As a news person, every day is Christmas. There's so much to cover, and it's all so interesting. It's such a contrast from, let's say, when I was coming up the ranks at Fox, 2006, 2007, the peak of the Iraq War, where, you were talking about the worst stuff every night, and it was terrible for Republicans, which is, Fox is a more right-leaning organization, so it was just like, oh my God, how are we gonna get through this? And it was dark, this is like the height of ISIS, the news was just terrible. And so that was rough, and then Obama was just, those were interesting years, so I enjoyed that coverage, but he was actually it was a lot of sleepy time in between his big things, like Obamacare and his pen and his phone on immigration reform. And then we had Joe Biden, and we weren't sure for 4 years who was really president. That was the big mystery. And now with Trump, it's amazing because you're drinking from a fire hose of news. And for me, just given my own worldview, I'm so excited about what he's doing. It's like it's truly like dreams come true all the time. Like the border numbers right now are so uplifting. So I feel so much more secure. I feel so much better about our future. I feel more optimistic about our country and its citizens. So it's just a combo of euphoria and also the joy of having plenty to cover.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. Beginning now with the content of this conversation, the title of this is called The New Media Revolution. And so I'd like for you just to begin perhaps and outline what you think this new media revolution is, what your position is, where these new medias came from, what exactly they are, and what have been the result of the changes, where you see it going in the future. Just give a broad outline, so to speak, of your position.
Well, I mean, I think the new media revolution was the child of the adage, necessity is the mother of all invention. It had to happen because the old system was so corrupt and so broken. And the people demanded alternate options. I spent most of my time at Fox being at the only outlet that was available for people who were right of center or right. There was no other option on television at all, anywhere. And then eventually we had Newsmax, which, it's fine. Like the production value is pretty low. I like Newsmax. Those are good guys. But I'm just saying it was not really a big alternative. And then in talk radio, you had Rush, who was the goddaddy of conservative thought, and then Hannity drafted behind him, and Levin. So if you went on talk radio, you'd have those three guys. If you turn on the TV, you'd have Fox. And that was pretty much it. Obviously, you had print options, but there was nothing in digital media that you would tune into. And truly, there were some pioneers in the space, but when it comes to like political podcasting, Ben Shapiro was really the one who I think created a real lane. And ironically, I helped him make his name on my show, The Kelly File on Fox. And then when I wasn't working, post-Fox, post-NBC, he came to me and he said, MK, you got to consider this lane as your next stop. And even back then, which was 2018, 2019, it wasn't anywhere near what it is now. And I remember Ben saying to me, if you came to this space and you made something out of it for your show, it would help this lane explode. And I think that turned out to be true. And I think as far as like independent news journalists making their home over here, I was one of the first, and that's an advantage. But I think so many are flocking over because it's going to be the future of how everyone consumes news. You young people do not sit in front of cable news hour after hour the way we used to, the way like my mom will. They just don't consume news that way. So the future is going to be digital. It's going to be a direct relationship between you and a trusted few who you believe will tell you the truth. And you'll know what their political bias is, and you'll factor that into what they're telling you, and then you'll probably pick somebody else who's got a different POV so you don't get corrupted by any one person's take on things. And it's just such a much more useful, truthful, honest way of getting your news. You will be far less bent on what the facts are if you take your news that way. Because, look, if you go to somebody who's just there for clicks and you know who was just trying to get you to click on them, you're too smart not to know, then at least you'll have the understanding that this is just, I'm being fed bait and I'm clicking on the bait because it's fun. But if you're really just looking for information, do you think you're going to get more from tuning into an hour of any cable news station, or you're going to get more from a 2-hour show like mine or a 1-hour show like Ben's, where we don't work for anybody? I work for myself. I own every piece of my company. There's nobody I have to answer to. I reject any advertiser whose money I don't want. And so I don't get censored by Pfizer if I want to say negative things about the vaccine and the 20th booster. It's things I couldn't do at certain other places I work. Anyway, that's what I think the digital future offers.
Right. So obviously, as you outlined in that previous answer to my question, and as I'm sure everybody knows, right, you begin your career in the old media space on cable television and 24-hour news cycles and media personalities and whatnot. I'm curious what you think made those mediums so successful at the time. Why were people so gravitated? Was it, as you said, necessity was the mother of invention? People were just demanding more and more news. Do you think it was artificial stimulation? Do you think there wasn't actually as much news to cover as perhaps it made it seem? How did they affect the ways in which people thought about politics?
Well, I think you have to choose your moments in the cable news history because, first we had CNN, and it was unlike anything we'd ever seen. And people do like news. They're into news. And it's entertaining in a way. News keeps you informed and makes you feel like a smarter, more involved, better civic citizen person. And it's also entertaining. Like car chases, which we used to do all the time. You'd see the numbers go up like that. Anna Nicole Smith, anything involving that woman. Anything. I mean, I was at the U.S. Supreme Court covering her case against the billionaire she married for 2 minutes. And, then the guy died, and she was entitled to what he promised her. She held up her end of the deal, but his family wasn't too happy about it, and it wound up spiraling into a Supreme Court case. I have never been on air so much in all my life. Around the world, they wanted hits from me, and it wasn't because they were super interested in bankruptcy law and, estate planning. So anyway, there were certain things that would spike the numbers, and CNN rode that for a while, and then MSNBC came on the scene, and they were straight news in the beginning. MS was not a left-leaning organization. It was pretty much like CNN. And then I think the entry of Fox in 1996 was a game changer because, as much as I love my time at Fox, and I'll defend Fox all day long, there's no question things got more pointedly partisan once Fox got in because Roger Ailes saw Fox as the antidote to left-wing media bias, and he was right, because it wasn't just CNN and MS that were, yes, centrist, but left-leaning. It was all the networks. ABC, NBC, and CBS were all centrist, but left-leaning. If you look at the story selection, if you look at what sound bites make the dance and which ones don't, it was all left-leaning. And Roger saw it because he was a lifelong conservative Republican. Dug ditches in Ohio when he was a kid and worked his way up and had a healthy disdain for just corporate elite America. And you don't see it unless that's your background. You don't see it unless those are your political beliefs. So he saw it, he and Rupert Murdoch, obviously a conservative, and created this thing that had never existed before. And one of the main themes on Fox was the liberal bias. And in one of the most seismic shifts in media, instead of, it happened twice, when they formed Fox and then really once again when just Trump called everybody fake news. Instead of saying, that's not true, we're objective news journalists, they decided to lean in and become the thing that Fox was saying they were, and then later, more pointedly, Trump was saying they were, to the point where here today in 2025 America, it's completely partisan. There isn't a Republican alive that trusts CNN anymore. I mean, if you're a Republican in this room and you do not trust CNN, raise your hand. Okay. You're smart. You shouldn't. Never mind MS. But at least MSNBC shows you what they're doing. At least they're kind of honest about it. CNN's more pernicious because they lie. They still go with like, we're the news. You see us on the airport, you're watching the news, as opposed to you're watching a bunch of partisan hacks try to manipulate you into voting Democrat. That's really what their tagline should be. So anyway, that's what happened with cable. And then Roger just did it better. Roger understood graphics and how to make sets look sort of, not referring to the anchors yet, but sexy. And then he did find a lot of beautiful women and put a lot of heavy makeup on them and false eyelashes and tight polyester hot pink dresses. And I get it because TV's a visual medium, and his thought was always, if you're channel surfing, you want to make the person stop the surf on Fox News. And people did. And there's a reason eventually CNN started copying that, and others did too, but no one could quite figure it out the way Roger did. Anyway, it had a great run. It's over now, but it certainly did have a heyday.
So I guess that is a perfect segue into the next question, which is, why necessarily is it over now? I mean, what, were the events broadly or more specific, do you think, that led to, say, the rise of a more digital consumption of media, the rise of podcasts, the rise of, other sorts of radio shows and things like that? I'm just curious why people have suddenly woken up, so to speak. Become woke, right? And the other direction.
Awake, not woke.
Yes, thank you. People have awoken to this new, media landscape. And I'm just curious why you think it developed and what specifically forced it or compelled it to develop.
Well, I think we watched the death of cable news before we saw the birth of digital media. It didn't happen perfectly simultaneously. And the death of cable news, I've said before, it's like Trump didn't kill cable news. like CNN and MSNBC. He didn't kill them, but he was like a Kevorkian. Like, they killed themselves, but he helped. You know, he kind of he set him up. He gave him the machine, and they were like, yeah, let's press the button. Because he really had no choice but to try to undermine the credibility of all these news organizations with the term fake news. And it was absolutely brilliant, and it was absolutely true. Russiagate was fake news, and it dominated our national news for years. Years. They've been making up lies about Trump, I mean, from the very beginning, to the point where what was real and what was fake criticism just wound up getting all dumped in the same bucket of fake news. And that's the left's fault. That's not the fault of anyone other than the left that just got so sick on their Trump derangement syndrome that they could not report truthfully anymore when it came to Orange Man bad. They viewed him as an existential figure. They defined their own morality on whether you had stood up against him, whether you were, going to fight the Hitler-esque guy or not. And if that's how you feel about him, it's going to affect your news coverage. So they started to circle the bowl with the centrists and center righties who they had. And I will tell you, that's where I was. Like, when I was on Fox News, on the ideological spectrum, I was probably a 6 on the ideological spectrum. If Hannity is a 10, I was like a 6. And now I'm more like an 8.5. Just like the ground has shifted underneath all of us, culturally especially, but pretty much on everything. And that's because of them. That's because the left, because the crazier they got, the more I was like, I'm not open-minded to you. I actually am going to make it my mission to defeat you, because what you're doing is evil. It's not just wrong, it's evil. So I think Trump, he made it his business to diminish and discredit news in general, and they leaned in. They did Russiagate, the COVID coverage, then the censorship regime, then the cooperation between the government and left-wing organizations and Republicans, everybody on the right half of the country, everybody who cast a vote for Trump got it pretty quickly, that they could not trust these organizations. And their viewership was sliced more than in half. And Republicans found different outlets. At the same time, there was just the buds of digital media. Joe Rogan was out there. He was still a left-wing Democrat voting for Bernie Sanders. The left is so upset they don't have their own Joe Rogan. They had Joe Rogan. They drove him, same as me. They drove him into the arms of the right. Now they don't understand how or why. And then you did have more and more prominent figures start to go over to independent media. A lot of them don't want to work for Fox. Fox has its own agenda too. It's very controlled. There are certain things you can and cannot say there. And Fox was always much more establishment Republican, not populist, not Trump, not MAGA, which is one of the reasons why they war with Trump a lot. Trump's always trying to get Rupert Murdoch to bend the knee. But read the Journal, read the New York Post. They're much more in line with like what National Review will publish. And I love National Review. I realize where I am. But those are more establishment types. They're not really populist MAGA types. And so one of the things Roger started to do is get more MAGA voices on. But in general, Fox is much more lined up with more of the establishment. So I think this other lane came about because Trump wrested control of the Republican Party, and young people were sick and tired of being manipulated. And I think there are a lot of young people today who've grown up in woketopia, who are having a strong reaction to it, who are very open-minded to a figure like Trump with the middle finger up, like we're not doing this, and started to look for alternate sources of news. And they were popping up. It wasn't just people like me who crossed over, but it was like homegrown guys who just developed their own thing. And there's another one, Dave Rubin, he was with the Young Turks. He was another lefty who got pushed over to the right by the insanity. But there's a lot of people, like I'm thinking of somebody like a Benny Johnson, he made it on his own. Like a lot of the guys at the Daily Wire, Matt Walsh, you never heard of him before, the past 5 years. Michael Knowles, same. Now these guys are stars because they're saying sensible things that appeal to a massive, especially young male audience.
That's very interesting. I'd like to pick up a bit on that point that you made about trust and the trust, or the lack of trust, so to speak, that people had in the old media, that seems to now have kind of resurged in the new media, and people, turn to figures like Ben Shapiro or like Joe Rogan or like Megyn Kelly, right, to get their news. And I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned earlier that now you're lucky enough to not have a boss, and you are your own boss. Do you think that that removes a kind of accountability that is a good thing for news or journalists to actually have, in the sense that, we've seen obviously the rise of people who have that credibility, such as yourself, such as Ben Shapiro. We've also seen the rise of, perhaps more conspiratorial, far-right individuals. I won't name any names, but I'm sure you can list your 5 favorites off the top of your head. And so I'm just wondering, where the line is, so to speak, between having a very tight, controlled, old legacy media versus now where things are much more open. Do you think there's risk there for, the more pervasive spread of misinformation or disinformation?
I'm against the newsroom controls of which you speak. I just think what they do is indoctrinate left-wing thinking at every turn. That's all they do. Listen, I worked for ABC, I worked for NBC, and I worked for Fox for most of my time on, in that medium. And they're extremely controlling. Fox was the least controlling of any place I've ever worked, but not a word would be said on NBC that wasn't screened and run by standards and practices and made sure that the bosses and all the powers that be approved of it. And those people all have a left-wing agenda. They are definitely not even open-minded to conservatives. So I'm against these forces because they're trying to make liberals out of everyone. That's really their goal. They want to get all of you voting Democrat, and they want to get older people voting Democrat, and they will shade the news however they have to. Just today on my show, we did an interview with a lawyer for a doctor who sued MSNBC and NBC for defamation. Why? Because in 2020, 6 weeks before the election, they ran this piece against this doctor who was working at an ICE facility in Georgia. And he was doing OBGYN work for women who went through this ICE facility. And some nurse who had an axe to grind, she'd had some employment dispute with them, et cetera, decided to say that this guy was doing hysterectomies on all the ICE, on all the detainees, the immigrants, and that he was a, quote, uterus collector. Now, that would be extraordinary if true. And MSNBC loved that story. It's Trump's ICE department 6 weeks before the election, and everybody knows Trump hates immigrants. He hates black and brown people. This is right up our alley. He's now stealing their uteruses. And not for a moment did anybody pause to say, like, this sounds a little far-fetched. It's one woman who's claiming this, and we don't know her credibility. And then MSNBC started to get into the story, and holes started popping up everywhere in the story. And it's all documented by texts and emails. But Standard & Practices did weigh in finally and said, this woman seems to have an axe to grind. The authorities involved at the facility are saying only 2 women there have ever had a hysterectomy, not 6. He's not a collector. This guy's got a stellar resume and reputation. They had to settle they lost on summary judgment. They got a declaration from the judge that they had said false things about this guy. He only did 2, not 6. He wasn't a uterus collector. And they just settled the case for some big number, we believe, because they're very happy on the plaintiff's side. Why? Because they wanted to hurt Trump. Because they're driven, those same, bosses just thought it was worth it. The lawyer told me today a story about Rachel Maddow. She sat down with her team and with Standard & Practices, and they said, the Standard people said, you don't have it. You don't have it. We haven't been able to verify these claims. Like, there's a lot of sketchiness going on here. And she said, well, if we don't have it, then, I guess maybe we shouldn't do it. And, but it's a really powerful story. And these allegations, 8 minutes later, she led with it. Nothing had happened in between A and B. And so I'm not for more layers. Like, they don't work. You're going to get the bent agenda of the people they put on the air and the staff that almost always reflects their ideals exactly. It's just what's happening now is we're migrating to a much more honest system. Much more honest. I gave an interview to the New York Times a couple weeks ago, and the journalist couldn't understand how I can expect my audience to trust me after I went out on a stage the night before the election and urged people to vote for Donald Trump. how can you be independent, and how can your audience trust you to cover him fairly when you've said you're voting for him and you've urged others to? As if that's any different than the New York Times endorsing a candidate, right? Like, you can have both an editorial side and a news side. You can have it in a person, you can have it in a paper. But I was trying to explain to this woman, what I am doing is so much more authentic than what she is doing and what they are doing at the New York Times, where they will tell you they have no bias. They'll just work it out in the written word. They'll just try to push silently, perniciously, their worldview on you in their straight news reports, in their opinion pages, without ever owning it. So you walk away, not now, I mean, you know, but for many years, people walked away thinking they'd been given straight news, and instead they were given opinion and commentary and spin, which is very dishonest. So anyway, I think it's all settling without those corporate overlords into a much healthier place.
Well, that sounds like a good thing. I guess I'm curious about then how you think the new media has really affected our politics. You know, this last election, I would say, was really the first one in which it was, you know, really the majority of people probably got their news from, say, podcasts or from social media, things like that. 2020 also obviously played a big role in that as well. I'm curious if you think that it's made it less divisive, the political arena, if you think it's made it more divisive, if you think people are more in echo chambers now than they were before, if you think we're in a new age of kind of, you know, enlightened citizens learning about all the various information that there is out there.
I don't think it's more divisive now at all. I just think, you know, people are seeing their worldview reflected. And another point I wanted to make before, you mentioned conspiracy theories, which are, you know, in abundance. And that is true. And that is also squarely on the shoulders of really the Biden administration in many ways. Like, they're the ones who suppressed talk about everything. Everything. You weren't allowed to say COVID came from a lab. You were racist if you said that, even though that's exactly what happened. It came from a lab. And our CIA and FBI said, oh, gee, we really can't determine it under Joe Biden. And as soon as he left, they were like, it was from the lab. And we're like, yeah, we knew. And the New York Times just did this long article about a month ago, like, we've been lied to about COVID. Like, right? What? You need to change that to, we lied to you. That's your headline. And then they actually lamented, why couldn't you say COVID came from a lab? Literally because your chief COVID reporter had a piece up saying everyone was racist. That's why, New York Times. Those of us on the right did not listen to you, but leftists listened to you. That is why you were not having those discussions over there. By the way, COVID vaccines and boosters have caused serious cases of myocarditis and pericarditis, especially in young teenage men, in cases resulting in heart scarring and even death. You weren't allowed to say that. That is an important medical fact to know. I am the mother of a 15-year-old boy. You couldn't say that. Not being able to say that stuff is what leads to conspiracy theorists. Having anything suppressed, having the JFK documents suppressed for as long as they were, leads to conspiracy theorists. There's a certain kind of person that always finds that stuff interesting. But the more you say you can't know and you can't talk about it, the more that person is going to spend time trying to know and talk about it. And I actually think it's fine that, like, I kind of find them amusing. You know, like, some of my good friends are conspiracy theorists. I don't have a conspiratorial bone in my body. I believe none of them, but I'm good friends with people who believe all of them. And I find these people mostly harmless and kind of fun and funny, and it's kind of like a jam. It's almost like a hobby, but they're not hurting anybody. And so what if they have some hosts out there who want to debate for weeks whether we actually landed on the moon? Okay, that's fine. It's not really how I want to spend my time, but if that's how you want to spend your time, I'm good with it.
All right. This will be my final question before we open it up to the audience, so I'll give you a chance to ruminate before we begin to the open Q&A. But the question that I would like to ask is, you know, here we are sitting under the guise of wonderful Mr. Buckley over here, and I'm very curious what you think the future of the Buckley conservative is in America, or, you know, in the Republican Party, if you think it's kind of been thrown out the window and we're in the age of MAGA for the next 4 years, next 8 years, the next 12 years, whatever it might be, or if you think there will be a kind of a resurgence of the old right, the old fusionist conservative. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think the stock is falling, to be perfectly honest. It's just because it's Trump's Republican Party, and he's in his own lane. The populism, the MAGA brand of republicanism is a combination of things. There's some Buckley in there. There is some National Review in there. But there's also some leftism in there. Hello, that's why we had the whole thing with tariffs recently. People like Tucker don't like Buckley because they think he was a neocon, and they're very more isolationist. And that wing of the party's winning, right? And also, just on the subject of free trade or fair trade's winning right now under Trump, and free trade is definitely more the National Review way. So there are certain things that I can see National Review and Buckley's beliefs are kind of on the downslope on. But I don't think they'll ever be erased because they're good ideas. There's too many just great ideas that are in the bloodstream of the country. And so I think sort of that almost like small c conservative will stay, but some of those favorite issues that were big in Buckley's time, and maybe were even right, for his time, where he was on them, things have changed. And, especially you take our bellicose nature and neocons. The Republican Party used to be pretty united on that. The John Podoritzes of commentary, he was friends with Tucker. Tucker worked for him. There wasn't much of a divide. But then we went through Iraq. We went through Afghanistan. You look at Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense. He was with me at Fox for many years. He was very neocon-y. But then he fought on 3 deployments at Gitmo, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and his worldview changed. And more, we all used to be so deferential to the generals, right? Like, whatever the generals said, we respected them. Now we're much more interested in what the enlisted guys have to say. Like, what's the truth about what happened over there, what was done to you, and what the general's agenda was. And it's one of the reasons why Trump started to war with some of these generals like Mark Milley. There's a famous story of him having a bunch of generals in there trying to advise him on how to handle one potential bombing or another. And they were all pro. And then he brought in a bunch of enlisted guys to get their point of view. And they were like, no, it's not worth it. These are the ones who are going to have to die. You young guys are the ones who are going to have to die. It's great for somebody like me who's in her 50s, who will never be drafted anywhere, to be like, yeah, do it. Then you ask me about my sons, and now I guess my daughter can get drafted too because women's lib. And I say no, I look at it very differently. So I think that the long haul of the past 25 years has changed Republicanism. So I think the influence will always be there, and certain of the policy positions will still be there, but the Republican Party has changed, and I would submit it has changed for the better.
Well, thank you very much for answering my questions. We'll now begin with some questions from the audience. If you have a question, you're to stand up and go to the microphone, which we have over here on a stand. And if you're on the left side of the room, you have to stand up and walk out the back to get into the line over here. But please just form a nice, orderly line over there, and we'll try and get your question in before 5:30.
And if we can be as concise as possible, we'd like to get through as many questions as possible.
Hi, thanks for being here. So you mentioned the left pushing a lot of people in America to the right, and I was wondering if you think that right now they're self-correcting, or if they're going to self-correct, whether it be in the media or as politicians.
Whether the left will?
Yeah.
Definitely not. No, fear not. They won't change at all. They'll be very beatable. They can't. They have this woke cancer in their party that they refuse to excise, and they'll continue losing until they do. And they don't even know how to do it. It's so fun watching them try to get into digital media now. Like Gavin Newsom's their answer. Don Lemon is the big hope. Good luck with that. No, I don't have any hope whatsoever that they will change.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear you describe new media from the inside. I'd be curious to hear, you've been very clear about what you saw as the downsides of old media and the excitements and positives of new media, but I would be curious to hear more specifically if you have any concerns or any negative views on new media in addition to the positive things you described?
Gee, nothing is coming to mind. I absolutely love it. I have to say, I love the medium, and I love it as a producer of it and a consumer of it. I love how much information I can get in one day thanks to podcasts. And not just that, but like vertical integrations, like, Insta and TikTok and Snap, I guess people use too. But for me, I use Insta and I use YouTube and I use podcast. And I can, you put it on 2.0 and you can get through, 5 one-hour podcasts in not much time at all. You could clean your house, you could do your, you could work out. That's what I do. I work out in the morning and I do my hair and makeup. And I've consumed so much news. I've got my favorites. I'll go to the left and the right because I don't like anyone corrupting my brain. I don't want to become some, knee-jerk right-wing pundit who only says right-wing things. I think it's boring, and I don't like people corrupting me. But you just can't do that. I have YouTube TV, right? So you can go on, you can watch any channel whenever you want, and usually you can watch them in a podcast version from the night before. They're so boring. They just don't know how to do it. It's these surface level conversations that just really aren't engrossing. If you sit and you listen to if you listen to 2 hours of my show, you will walk away enriched. You will understand the Abrego Garcia case better than you would ever understand it from even a 10-minute segment, which is long for cable, on any cable news station. It's not satisfying. You are not sated if you spent any time in the digital lane. So no, I only have positive things to say about it.
Hi, I had a question about, so now that Hollywood is breaking down along with the kind of traditional news media, they're starting a conservative kind of film renaissance. What studios do you see doing best in that, if you have any insight into that? And how can somebody who's looking to push back as a creative and a filmmaker, how can you be effective in that lane?
Well, it's not going to be Disney.
Yeah.
It's so great to see them learn that lesson, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love the Snow White story. Don't you love it? I love all the hit pieces on that moron. It's such just desserts what they're suffering right now. And they've been suffering it for a long time, but they haven't been listening. It's like Bud Light. They have to really feel the pain before they start listening to us, and then eventually we will bring them to heel. I don't know of a studio that I would say is fair and balanced. I'll talk about one individual who I trust. His name is Mark Joseph. He made the movie Reagan, which I hope you guys have all seen. It's yes for Reagan, both the man and the movie. And he's done a bunch of films that are, from a more conservative perspective that do well. The guys behind, now I'm gonna forget the name, the sex trafficking one. Angel Studios, yep, they're good. They're small, but they're starting to do more and more conservative films. But there's not really, as far as I know, a studio devoted to it, which is so dumb, right? I mean, if that's what you're interested in, there will be so many right-wing money guys who would like to invest in that because it's half the country who's been totally underserved. It's just from a business perspective. You know how these liberals think they're so holier than thou and they would never deign to make a film that would be consumed by us deplorables over here on the right. Well, the first person who says, I love the deplorables, I'm a deplorable, and I understand deplorable TV, yes, is going to be the next billionaire.
Okay.
And you'll just create an alternative. This is what Barry Weiss always says, and I agree with her, that the answer is not so much to change the existing institutions. The answer is to build our own and make them bigger and better than theirs. And I'm sure that's why you're all at Yale. Good luck. Being at Yale as a conservative, I think, is a very good thing for you. It's a brave thing, and it's going to make you more sharp-tongued in dealing with leftists who try to corrupt you than anybody else on earth. So it's good. It's a plus. So do it.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I think some of the first presidential debates I watched, when you're still a news anchor, I watched them and enjoyed them very much.
From your cradle.
I've been watching presidential debates for a very long time. I'm embarrassed to admit. Yesterday last month I read about an 8-year-old girl named Nicole Dang who had HIV and was being kept alive basically by 12 cents a day in USAID money. And I read in that same piece that she died when Elon Musk and Doge cut USAID. And so I read that story there in the press, but I also know that people who would get a lot of their news from the new alternative media that you described today maybe have not seen those same stories. So my question would be, do you see that as a problem that we now have a media landscape where maybe some people will never hear about an 8-year-old girl who's now dying because of Elon Musk and Donald Trump's cuts to USAID?
I don't, because I think net, people are going to walk away with the opinions they're going to walk away with. And so while one fact or one story might soften somebody's view, I just don't think it's going to really change their views. You know, people are who they are, and they have really deep-seated reasons for their political beliefs, and it's very hard to change them. That's why I'm usually telling people, don't try. It's pointless to try. And what do you care? You know, you can be friends with people who are across the aisle. All my best friends are liberals. So I just don't think the answer to the people who you might want to support USAID is to show them those videos, because they have a long list of reasons why they're against that organization. And the likelihood of them flipping the worldview is very slim. So I see your point. But the other thing is, like, if we start doing that, then you're going to have to sit here for an hour while they show you all their contextual articles that would change your worldview on thing, or so they hope, and it probably won't. My general feeling is it's very hard to change people's political views. And when it comes to actual personal relationships, you should just avoid politics at all costs, unless it's somebody who shares your views.
Okay, I'll try to go quickly. I'd like to first make a point that you brought up earlier about Trump and the media being the enemy of the people. He actually first, quite a few times, said fake news is the enemy of the people, and then unconsciously, subconsciously, maybe purposely, some combination thereof, the media just chose to associate themselves with fake news and say, he said the media is, and that's actually not what he started out saying. And I just think it's an important distinction to make for, you know, those of you in the audience who are largely conservative and hear that still today. But my question was, since you already in the first response answered that you don't think the legacy media is ever going to change, what do you think it will take for a majority of the public at large to finally see the mask come off? And there was just a story today now that the chair of the FHA has made a criminal referral to the DOJ on Letitia James for naming her father as her husband on a loan application.
That's the anecdotal evidence. It's great. It's a great complaint, but keep going. Sorry.
So no, that's all fine. So it's the perfect irony and display of do as I say, not as I do. They accused Trump of doing things to change the value of his property so he would get more preferential rates on a loan, when she is apparently doing the exact same thing. So what is it going to take for, let's say, new media to paper that out there and drop the mask on legacy media for those of us outside here who haven't gotten it?
It's already been done. I mean, it's been done, and it's getting done every day. That was our lead today. I'm in digital media. What do you need to know about the case? 'Cause, I mean, it's being done. Now look, not everybody in digital media is a news person, you know, and part of what's very popular about the medium and great is you'll have somebody like a Joe Rogan who's not a journalist talking about the news, doing interviews with people. He gets blowback because he has so many listeners and viewers that people in my business want him to be more responsible, right? Like offer the other side and correct your guests. I think eventually people will become smart enough to realize they're not watching a news program. He doesn't have that commitment to you. You're watching something for entertainment and maybe to get like his view on the news. But if you really just want to totally understand a story that you can then repeat to somebody else with facts and know you're not embarrassing yourself, you are going to have to work for it a little bit. You know, you can't listen to like, whatever. I don't mean this as disrespect to Joe Rogan. I think he would say the same thing. But you have to listen to somebody who you trust to bring you the honest facts and then identify the rest as spin. But to the core question you're raising, it's already happening. And you just have to, you got to figure out who you trust to bring you the straight scoop on these stories and to bring you the perspective. And sorry, I just do one more example. So last week in the news was Trump cracking down on this guy, Miles Taylor, who was anonymous in the first administration. Remember, he published a piece in the New York Times under anonymous saying, "We are watching Donald Trump, we've got the bridle on him and we pull it. Like we're in charge. The grown-ups are in charge. Well, Miles described himself as like a senior official in the Trump, and he was like a nobody in DHS. And this last week, Trump announced that he was going to look into whether Miles Taylor used any confidential or classified information in keeping an eye on Trump and leaking to the media. And now Miles, of course, you won't be surprised to learn, is playing the victim. Poor me, I knew it happened. Like, okay, and he yanked his security clearance. Why does Miles still have his security clearance? He left the administration in 2019. Anyway, the media's outraged, and there was actually an article in Politico that said never before has an administration, has a White House manipulated a Department of Justice to exact retribution on his political enemies. Right? Really? Even put the Trump stuff to the side, the Trump lawfare. Why don't you ask James O'Keefe, right? Do you remember this sort of, this journalist who does like the gotcha videos that are undercover, who tried to buy the Ashley Biden diary that some woman in the same drug house found and was trying to auction off? He tried to buy it. He got raided by the FBI, and so did half his staff, with battering rams. And the DOJ was coming after him hard. It's not illegal to buy a stolen diary, even if it's stolen. Not illegal. It's not illegal to take stolen papers and put them on the front page of the New York Times. It's called the Pentagon Papers. You can do all of that. You just cannot pay for somebody to commit a crime to get the information, which the DOJ knew under Joe Biden, but they sicked them on James O'Keefe anyway. They sicked the IRS on Matt Taibbi the day he testified before the House Committee on Weaponization of Government. That day, he went home and got a door knock from the IRS, which was then beginning an audit of him. Now it's been dropped. My point is simply, like, this manipulation and this context to what Trump is doing will never be offered to you in the New York Times. You will not read it. And you will not read the truth facts about this Abrego Garcia and what he did, etc. And so you've got to find personalities, individuals who you trust to bring you the full facts, even if they're bad for their side. And I will say on that front, there are few and far in between.
Thank you.
Michael Colangelo, it's the Godfather. Oh no, he's the guy who worked in the Alvin Bragg DA, and then he was at DOJ, and then he went to Alvin Bragg's DA. Yeah, from the federal DOJ, which nobody ever does. I was thinking Frank Pentangelo, who was in The Godfather. Remember? Oh, they put me down. They say Michael Corleone did this, Michael Corleone did that. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. I wanted to, I guess, hear, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, about your own political sort of development over the past 8 to 10 years, and sort of the development of a lot of people that, I guess, now identify themselves as a real, I guess, part of the Trump world, the Trump circle. You know, you obviously had that very famous debate in August of 2015 where you sort of went at him, and I've heard you say, you know, looking back, you think he sort of felt bad because, you know, he thought you were his friend, but then you decided to sort of go at him. And then, you know, today, in November, you sort of gave his closing message, I guess 8 years later, and a lot of people close to Trump today, JD, you know, Howard Lutnick did a Hillary fundraiser in 2016. Even Elon Musk was considered very much a liberal, you know, 5 years ago. I'm wondering why you think this sort of shift has occurred, you know, for you personally, and then for all the people that are now obviously very strongly connected with the president.
Thank you for that. I mean, yeah, my evolution with Trump you could write a whole book about it. A lot of things are in there. So I was raised a Democrat. My mom is a Democrat. My dad was a Democrat. Everyone I knew was a Democrat. We were in upstate New York, first Syracuse and then Albany. And we weren't political. You know, like my parents weren't spewing political talking points. We were Catholic, so we were pro-life. But on every other point, we were like, okay, we're registered Democrats because Republicans are for the rich. And we're not rich. Simple as that. It wasn't until I went to law school and became a lawyer and started to see what was happening in my paycheck that I started to investigate Republicanism. Like, wow. And then I got a job with Jones Day, which is a big sort of white shoe law firm, and got exposed to more Republicans than I'd ever seen before. And that started to warm me up because they seemed to make a lot of sense. And then I got a job at Fox. I would have just as easily gone to MSNBC or CNN. It was 2004. MS hadn't lost its mind. But I wasn't partisan. I just wanted to do the news. But then for the next 14 years, I was around really smart, dynamic, interesting, great Republicans who I adored and just listened to their ideas. You know, like good luck sitting in a room, as I was privileged to do with Rush Limbaugh for hours. I went to his wedding, number 4. It stuck. It stuck. And not get enthusiastic about Republican ideas. You know, he was, oh God, he was amazing. He would just inspire you with his enthusiasm for what the right stands for and how wrong the other side was. So that evolution happened and got me like from a 4 to a 6. And then how did I get from 6 to 8.5? It just, the absolute insanity of the past 6 to 8 years. You know, telling white kids they're born with inherent sin that they can never overcome. Telling black and brown kids they're born with inherent disadvantage that we all feel really sorry for them about. Like totally disempowering. Telling little kids that it's totally fine for them to decide on their own that they can change their gender and engage in this mutilation of their own healthy bodies, as opposed to putting them in front of a psychiatrist who might just ask them questions like, what's going on? Are your parents getting a divorce? Have you been bullied? Which is, they're not allowed to ask that in some states. It's considered conversion therapy. You're only allowed to just affirm. All that craziness made me run cancel culture, of which I was a victim. I don't like the word victim, but I was canceled. It was just so insane and bullshit. And the Me Too movement, for that matter, of which I was kind of a part too, unwilling, but I was a part. It was so crazy what they did to Brett Kavanaugh. Like there were these moments in time where you're like, those are insane lunatics, and I want nothing to do with them. In our schools in New York, you guys appreciate education, but our boys were at Collegiate, which is an amazing boys' school. It's one of the top boys' schools in the nation, and our daughter was at Spence, one of the top girls' schools in the nation. And they circulated this mandatory reading piece for the teachers after George Floyd that said, the problem with schools is that we have white teachers who indoctrinate students in Black death, that we need studies on how white mothers are raising all these racist killers, and how in every classroom where white kids learn, there is a future killer cop. And it was right around there that we pieced out of Collegiate, right? All these things, I'm like, I'll be a 10. I don't care. I'll do whatever I have to defeat all of you. Like, this is incredibly ugly. It's evil. It's wrong. And you know what it's doing? Exactly what I knew it would do and have been predicting for years. It's doing the same thing that having every month be a Women's History Month or a gay month or a black month or a Indian month is doing. It's driving people to the Republican Party, right? It's making the 18 to 21-year-olds the most conservative age cohort alive. Literally, there's just a poll that just came out. We are winning with the 18 to 21-year-olds. We never win the young people. And now we are, and I'd love to say it's because of great conservative thought and everybody's reading the right magazines. It's because of them. They're driving them to us. It's wonderful. So I say, you do your podcast, Gavin, and John Oliver, you do your 20-minute monologues on how it's fine to have boys play against girls in sports. There's no physical advantage. Keep it rolling. They're secretly on our team. Okay, sorry, next person.
We've got time for one final, very brief question.
Well, wait, we can do just a couple more. I know you don't have a lot of time, but I was going to catch a flight, but it was delayed.
Hi, Megyn. Thanks so
Hi.
much for being here. My name's Olivia. I'm a 3L at the law school. You mentioned Matt Walsh earlier, and I recently watched his video response to your critique on how the movement on the right is, at least among conservative young men, is to purport this vision of the ideal conservative woman who stays at home. And I was wondering if you had a response to him, which I think was a bit of a mischaracterization of your argument, because from what I understand, you did not sacrifice your family at the expense of your career, but your argument was more on the importance of not shunning women in the conservative movement who want to be future leaders. So I was wondering, too, if you had any advice for young women, too.
So I take it if you're a 3L at Yale Law, you're not planning on not working. You plan on having a career. So good for you. Honestly, I welcome all choices. I think it's awesome for the women who want to become working moms or stay-at-home moms. It's fine by me. I love them all. Which I would say makes me different from some people on the conservative side. And I really hope, especially to this group, that we don't so overcorrect the crazy, rabid, Nazi feminist messaging with new messaging that shames women out of working if they want a career. Because that is, I don't know if I can say this, fucking bullshit. So I just think it's very stupid. If we do that, we don't have a Tulsi Gabbard. You know, if we do that, we don't have a Kristi Noem. If we do that, we don't have an Amy Coney Barrett. There are so many amazing conservative women who are really important to our movement that we would shame right out of those posts. And who are young conservative women likely to listen to? Are they more likely to tune in to a hard right, young guy who talks about how limited their choices ought to be, or are they more likely to listen to a more right-leaning woman with whom they have some things in common and maybe has sometimes softer messaging that works better for females? It's just utterly stupid to suggest that conservatives need to fight back against the feminazis by shaming women out of the workforce. So that's where I stand. We'll bang these out. I'm going to get everybody who's standing there.
Phrasing the question, for me, the most amazing thing, the Christmas since January 20th, is the great unmasking. And by that I mean learning more about the USAID and how dollars flowed towards censorship, because you can't have free ideas, free speech, none of the above, if you have the apparatchik trying to censor you, which is what happened, obviously, with the former Twitter. So to what, and then the other shocking thing from my perspective was learning the long game that Obama played with the 2012 amendment to the Smith-Mundt Act that allowed propaganda on American soil, not just outside of this country. So it kind of explains how
we got to go faster.
So government dollars were used to censor, and then government dollars were used to pay for propaganda on American soil. So to what extent is it necessary to dismantle that and to have accountability for?
Yeah, entirely. It must be entirely dismantled, and this is one of the reasons why Trump is such a threat. And the leftists are so upset and calling him Hitler and trying to find a way to stop his agenda and going to the courts and doing whatever they can, because having that system broken up is far worse than just having a Republican in office passing tax cuts. Like, that undercuts the whole game forever. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why the working class is Trump's strongest base, because they couldn't care less about those systems. They've never been a part of them. They've never benefited from them. And that's why Trump is right about his Fifth Avenue rule of, like, I could basically shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. They'd never abandon me. Because Trump, too, doesn't care about those institutions. And he cares enough to try to knock them down. He's starting, yes, USAID and places like that, but also academic institutions. You saw his threats to Harvard. They just lost $2.2 billion. Yes, they can afford it. Yeah. And Columbia and the pushback against these NGOs and the clearing out of the deep state, just this bureaucracy, this never-ending bureaucracy in Washington. So yeah, this system, Bill Maher said it best when he said, we don't need a revolution in this country, right as Trump was about to be elected. We need a colonic. And that's kind of what Trump is, and it gets to what you're saying.
We're going to aim for 20 seconds or less.
Hi, Megyn.
Hi.
My statement in question to you is, as someone who covers political deceptions on YouTube, I'm curious what's the most effective tactic you've seen politicians or the media use to manipulate public perception without technically lying? And do you think independent platforms like YouTube are actually exposing the truth or just being the new propaganda machines in disguise?
Thank you. I mean, it can be both. I think that's sort of one of the themes of tonight. It can be both. You're not guaranteed all facts if you tune into YouTube or CNN or Fox or ABC or NBC or any of them. You're just not. That's kind of one of the things we're getting at is you are going to be manipulated by all of them. And it's going to be up to you to figure out, who do I want to be manipulated by? Who do I trust to do this in a way that's close to honest and doesn't make me look like a fool? So that's my basic, feeling on it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Hello, Megan. Welcome.
Hi.
My name is Joyce the Voice, and I am an advocate for children and for families. And I have a question for you. I appreciate very much that you support women, bathroom safety, not transing children, all that gamut. I'm so happy you're red-pilled now. My question is, when you worked for NBC, you did talk about the agencies, the news agencies pressuring. If you recall, you interviewed James Alefantis, and that was the Comet Pizza.
That was at Fox.
Oh, was that Fox? I can't recall which station it was, but it was mainstream media. So my question is, so you didn't press him on anything. They showed an image of a girl taped down to a table, and she was smiling. He said it was his goddaughter or niece or whoever. But you didn't press it, but that's grooming. And so I'm not going into the Pizzagate question. My question for you is, have you changed your position on, or do you take a stand now that you're not working for Fox any longer, on that interview?
I don't remember the specifics of that interview. My general feeling is that people who believe in Pizzagate hate that interview, and I'm not one of the people who believes in Pizzagate at all. So I can't defend one particular exchange that I don't remember the whole interview. I just know I interviewed him, and I did not believe and do not believe that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta are running a child sex trafficking ring out of Comet Pizza. No.
My question was about the photograph of the girl being...
But as I say, I don't remember that. I'm sure if I had seen anything troubling with respect to a minor, I would have followed up on it. I'm happy to go back and look at it. But I guarantee you, if I had seen anything troubling on a child, I would have satisfied myself that there was no issue. The main charity that I'm involved with in life is Child Help, which is devoted to helping kids who are abused. So this is one of my core issues. This is not something that I treat lightly. But I know that and I'm not saying, I don't know what your beliefs are, but I know that people who believe in Pizzagate constantly ask me about James Alefantis and feel that I missed the biggest story of the... So no, I don't agree at all.
Thank you.
Hi, Megan. It's so great to meet you. I'm Fiona Bolton-Sheen. I'm a first-year MPP at the Jackson School. My question's kind of similar to my law school friend over here. I'm just wondering, what advice do you have for women specifically, if they are even just curious about the conservative movement? Because it feels like the space feels a little bro-y and the manosphere and all these podcasts, but how can you kind of engage in very nuanced, critical conversations then with people that are just a little suspicious?
Thank you for that. And we can't let it become too bro-y. That's bullshit. There are just as many female Republican voters as there are male, and the way that we stop it from becoming totally bro-tastic is by speaking out and saying when we think people have gone too far, even on our side. We were talking about Matt Walsh earlier. I like Matt. I think he's incredibly talented. His two movies, What is a Woman and Am I Racist, are truly brilliant. And he's done more in the gender lane than 99.9% of people out there. And that lane is filled mostly with women. There aren't that many men. There's Billboard Chris, there's Matt Walsh. So he's been a real pioneer and an important voice. We vastly differ on the future of the Conservative Party, of the Republican Party, and women's role in it. And we vastly differ on what's best for America. But my own position is that it is 100% possible to be a working woman and a great mother. And I know that to be true because I'm living it. Don't let anyone discourage you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kishan. I'll keep this short since I guess I'm the last one. I'm a third-year MBA and MPP student. Super excited to have you here. I've been watching you since I was in high school, and you're one of the people who really got me interested in policy. So thank you. But my question is about the kind of change in rhetoric around experts and expertise in general. And I think back in the day, we used to watch people like Milton Friedman talk about economic policy, and that was kind of actually a little bit cool, or maybe I was just a nerd. I don't know. But I think there's a lot of change now where we don't necessarily regard expertise in the same way, and we're a little bit skeptical, and we replace it with commentary or pundits. Just kind of curious what you think the role for media should be in that.
Yeah, I definitely think we've seen the death of the experts, and that's good. Because, look, again, I blame the left. 51 intelligence experts say the Hunter Biden laptop story is Russian disinformation. 51. You know, Kamala Harris, 50 Nobel laureates said, my economic plan is going to be better than Trump's. Like, no one believes that. Like, no one, we've stopped listening to these so-called experts. Who's an expert on infectious disease and health? Anthony Fauci. He told us we had to stay 6 feet apart from each other during COVID, only to later admit he totally made that up. Has absolutely no scientific backing. He told us we shouldn't wear the masks before he told us we did need to wear the masks. And then they became mandatory, notwithstanding a study that was done on tens of thousands of students in Atlanta that proved they do nothing. Who ran that study? The CDC. As they were mandating that we wear the mask and our children wear the mask. So the expertise died over COVID in particular. And I think that's a good thing. I think, and this is kind of a funny thing to say to the people at Yale. So my husband went to Duke and I went to Syracuse, and then I went to Albany Law School, and he went to Georgetown for his MBA. And all along, I went to public school, he went to a nice boys' private school in Pennsylvania. And he, ever since we got married, he kept saying, Meg, you put too much emphasis on people's academic pedigree. And I'm going to venture to say you all are just like me in that way. And he used to say to me, you got to understand, like, those institutions don't necessarily produce anybody who's any smarter or more savvy or street smart than an institution like Syracuse or somebody like Charlie Kirk, who didn't go to college at all, right? It depends on the individual in all cases. There'll be absolutely brilliant people here, and then there'll be people here who you would definitely not want arguing your case if you were ever, you know, caught and accused of a crime. So anyway, I think we do get a little caught up in this country on expertise and credentialism, and it's a problem. Now, Douglas Murray was making this point on Joe Rogan's podcast recently. Should we allow somebody who doesn't know anything about history, and I'm not saying that's necessarily what happened in the case Douglas Murray was railing about, but I'm just saying in general, to go on and purport to be a historian and try to recast Winston Churchill as the greatest villain of World War II? I mean, I'm fine if it happens, but it should be a buyer beware situation. You know, the public should be aware. This guy is saying this because he's got some thoughts, but he's an outlier. And if it were me personally and I was going to have a debate like that, I'd make sure that either I heavily researched the other side so I could press, or I'd bring on somebody. But look, we're sliding into a world in which expertise is dead. It's not a future industry, and it's not respected, I think, by most people, at least on the right half of the country, because it's been so manipulated to crush our worldviews. So don't go. Did you say you're a PhD student? MBA. Oh, good. That's fine. You'll be fine. Good.
Well, Ms. Kelly, thank you very much again for answering these questions.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, guys.
And thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you.
All the best, guys.